Hello there, and welcome to the Time Machine with Trish and Mike. I'm Mike.
And I'm Trish.
And we're glad you're with us once again here for episode 13.
So ominous.
Yeah. 13.
And yet I don't really feel like anything we're talking about is like overly, like we've had other episodes with more mysteries, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, we've got tornado stuff, which there's kind of some freaky coincidences to that, but...
Oh, I look forward to hearing that.
Yeah, and we do have things going on.
More illness and death.
Yeah, so that goes right along with 2020. And then we have packing up and moving to a new town in the middle of the night. So we do have some interesting and mysterious, not really mysterious, just
some intriguing.
I don't know. The fact that this is episode 13 probably explains why our pre-show conversation has been so all over the place.
That's true. That's true.
The stuff that y'all don't get to hear on the show.
As we prep.
Yes.
But yeah, so it's March 25th. Woohoo.
Yes, it is.
Tomorrow is the last day of work for me before spring break. Excitement.
Good for you.
You know, my plans were going to be a lot better. In October, I had the plan of possibly going to Los Angeles. I was like, if I take my 2 personal days and I go over spring break, I can come back in time to quarantine for 2 weeks. It was a good plan back in October. Now we laugh and cry and drink a glass of wine.
Or 2. But, you know, I think it's hard to put deadlines on things, especially because like with you and the international aspect of it and the different countries and different rules. And so I would think by October this year, you can do it. Certainly hope before then. I hope you could do it this summer.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
You know,
but like you said, and then you never know about the supplies of vaccine and the rollout and whatever. It's another day closer. We'll just be positive.
And that's the way to look at it. Literally every day is one day closer to being done with this deal. So
next week when we record, it will be 1 week closer.
Exactly. This is episode 13. Maybe by episode 31, we'll be sort of normal-ish.
Sort of normal-ish. I like it.
That would be like, what, episode 31 probably is late July, early August?
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah.
You're better at math than me, as we've
learned that. Well, I mean, episode 1 started December 31st. There's 52 weeks in a year, at least in an American year. I don't know about a Canadian year. Yes. I assume you have the same calendar. But we did talk about calendars in one of the early episodes in the archives, which we tell you all the time, go back and listen to because, you know.
There's good stuff in there.
Yeah, and you're still in quarantine, so it's not like you really have anything else to go do anyway. I mean, you've watched everything on Netflix, and I mean, Disney Plus just put out Falcon and Winter Soldier, which is
we
really
just had
good.
The Snyder Cut last week.
Yes.
So speaking of movies, that actually brings us into the first topic.
It does.
Yeah. So 1930, March 31st, the Motion Picture Production Code is instituted, which imposed strict guidelines on the treatment of topics like sex, crime, religion, and violence in film in the United States for the next 38 years. It's often known as the Hays Code. So if you don't recognize it as the Motion Picture Production Code, Hays Code might ring a few bells. Some of these aspects of the code are very interesting.
How interesting are they?
Well, I think as you scroll through them, there's one that talks about that there will be no excessive or lustful kissing, particularly when one character or the other is like a very main important character.
So like the background characters can be making out, but if you're front and center, it's like, no.
Yes, they're a little more just like, and I'm like, but what constitutes like,
I guess
what's excessive to one person is not excessive to another.
Yeah, all this is subject to interpretation.
Yeah, so I thought that was just one of the funnier ones. But there's things like there can't be any pointed profanity by either title or lip. So you can't speak it or have it in the title. So it includes the words God, Lord, Jesus, Christ, unless they use it reverently. Hell, it's written SOB. I'm assuming you can't say SOB or son of a bitch.
Can we say that on the show?
Now we have to have a warning. We're now.
How far down the George Carlin 7 words you can't say list are we going with this?
I like how they have God, like Southern, like Gawd, like GAWD.
Oh, God.
And every other profane and vulgar expression, however it may be spelt, is how it's written in the code.
No, I don't really hear gowd. Good gowd. I
Good
guess
gowd.
Yeah, gowd. I guess would be like that. Okay, because like I more likely hear like someone say like oh loud, like Lord.
Oh yeah.
Loud. Oh loud.
Yeah.
Oh Lord, help me.
Well, I wonder if it's in like other languages. So like growing up, my grandmother and grandfather spoke Scottish Gaelic, and I grew up with my grandmother would be like, oh, you shut up, right? She'd say that to us all the time. And it was Jesus, shut up. Like Jesus is in Gaelic.
Jesus in Gaelic?
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
No nudity or even suggestive nudity, like not even silhouette. So like that whole TikTok challenge that's going around with like if you see it, it's like the red light.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's like the silhouette of someone very seductive. That would be a big no-no according to this code.
The code also wouldn't apply to social media apps in 2021
well,
either.
21, yes. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
right?
But hypothetically, yeah.
Hypothetically, that we all have been seeing. Illegal traffic in drugs.
Okay.
No sexual perversion. Again, open to interpretation. Nothing to do with sexual hygiene or venereal diseases.
You could be doing like a public health service.
Apparently not.
I'm just saying. No. I could justify doing that.
I like this where it says no actual childbirth in fact or in silhouette.
Okay.
You couldn't ridicule the clergy. And then there's another subsection of the code that said that there had to be special care and access to the manner in which the following subjects are treated. So they're saying these are kind of sensitive issues.
Tread lightly.
Tread lightly.
Okay.
So the use of your flag was is the number one.
Okay.
International relations. So it says avoid picturizing in an unfavorable light another country's religion, history, institutions, prominent people, and citizenry.
Okay.
That's kind of arson.
All right.
Like, I guess you have to tread carefully with how you use arson in a movie.
You can maybe only use it in a historical context.
Possibly.
Okay.
The use of firearms. Theft, robbery, safe cracking, and dynamiting of trains, mines, buildings, etc.
Isn't that every Western movie ever?
I know. And a lot of these Western movies were filmed in
the 30s and 40s and stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Because this goes up until about 1953, and then there's a big court case because, of course, America starts to import more foreign films. And
where they don't have these restrictions.
Yeah, the code in America didn't apply to foreign films. And so the production companies in America start to go to the courts to fight it. And they're like, look, this code is actually kind of unreasonable and restricts your freedoms. It's unconstitutional, is what they eventually talk about. But methods of mugging. So apparently you can mug some people some ways, but not other ways.
Maybe non-violent mugging.
Yeah.
Or you can only give somebody a coffee mug as mugging.
Oh, that kind of mugging. Or like mugging to the camera.
Maybe, yeah.
Making a facial expression.
Yeah.
I mean, some make sense because some are definitely very sensitive subjects. So it talks about like murder and sexual assault and how children and animals are treated on film. That makes sense.
Those I get.
Yeah. The institution of marriage is one. Surgical operations.
And by 1958, all these don't apply anymore.
Yeah, like 53, they start to have these court cases. And so for 38 years, this code is very heavily influenced in terms of titles and scenes in films and how you could portray certain subject matters. And then after that, it kind of goes out the window. Can you imagine? I used to teach film and I'd be asking my grade 11s and my grade 12s, and like, can you imagine applying these to films nowadays, like keeping the plot but applying these codes?
Oh yeah, right? It would be very hard. Well,
Yeah.
It's like I go back and watch shows maybe from the 80s or 90s. Well, like we'll take The Simpsons, for example. Because I think most people have watched at least an episode here or there or something of The Simpsons. For its time, it was very controversial.
Oh, yes. I wasn't allowed to watch it right away. I had to be older. My mom wouldn't let me. My brothers would sneak it for me.
Well, your mom knows that story now.
Well, she shouldn't have let them have a TV in their bedroom.
There you go. They're going to be grounded when they go back to visit. But it was controversial at the time. You look at it now compared to shows on TV and you go,
it's so tame.
It's nothing compared to some of the stuff. Conversely, there are shows from the 70s and 80s that you go back and look at and you're like, how did this get on the air?
Yes.
Because just society has changed so much in time. Yeah.
It's really fascinating. It's interesting to just look through the historical lens at films and like you were saying, in the 30s, we talk about, well, you can't have any mixed races, interacting with each other in a sexual manner, and how that's so reflective of the time period, and how luckily and thankfully we've changed and moved on, and it's not a big deal anymore, or it shouldn't be a big deal anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, thank you, entertainment, for getting us through 2020 and 2021.
That was a big thing. You had, and I know we discussed this several weeks back, where, throughout quarantine times of 2020, every month or two, one of the different streaming services would have a new show or a movie. Like you had, Disney put Onward out on Disney Plus, and then Netflix gave us Tiger King. And
I was going to say, it's the 1 year anniversary of Tiger King.
It is. It's somewhere around here. I don't remember the exact date that it came out, but it was sometime in March.
It's like it was around here when everyone started watching it, because I was on March break when I sat down to watch it.
Yeah, because it was like one of the first big things that everybody united behind during quarantine time. It's like, I'm going to watch that this weekend.
Yeah. It's like we're all hunkered down watching our entertainment. Staying away from each other.
Speaking of hunkering down, so there's a movie in the 90s that was very popular about a certain weather event.
Ooh, I think I know which one you're alluding to. I mean, there's a few you could be alluding to. We did talk about The Perfect Storm last week.
Very true. I am referring to the one that actually used to have a experience at Universal Orlando that is closed now.
Was there an experience there? There was a ride?
There was a Twister ride. Well, it wasn't. It wasn't a ride. It was okay. So you'd walk into, you go through the line, and it's kind of like stuff from the movie, props and that sort of thing. But the main attraction is you're basically walk onto the porch, and you're looking out at the drive-in in the movie, and the weather picks up, and all of a sudden the lights go out, and there's like a telephone pole that falls down, so sparklers shoot out of it. A cow goes flying by. Oh, no. And then you see like this twister coming through the movie screen, and the movie screen breaks apart, and the top of the porch like lifts up and kind of crashes down on you.
Oh, that would be so funky. That'd be cool.
Mm-hmm. I bring this up because we've come a long way in tornado forecasting.
I can imagine the science is much better nowadays.
Much better indeed. So we go back to March 25th, 1948. That is when the first successful tornado forecast predicted a tornado. Here's what happened. Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, obviously. Well, I don't want to say obviously, because you do have some states and other, like there's a Kansas City, Kansas, and a Kansas City, Missouri. So, but I don't know of another Oklahoma City in a state other than Oklahoma. So
there's definitely not one in Canada. So
it's a big area. Do we know that? I'm just saying that could be. You never know.
There could be. You never know.
Anyway, so on March 20th, 1948, so 5 days earlier, the base got hit with an F3 tornado that came through, caused a lot of damage and everything. And so they were inquiring how we didn't know this was coming. Like, how did this happen? Thankfully, it missed most of the structures on the base. Of course, it hits the area where like the most expensive planes it causes about $10 million in damage.
Oof. And 10 million back then. Eep.
Yeah, so it's like 106 million now. So it definitely wasn't
these
good.
military individuals have a reason to be grumpy.
Yes. So what happens is, this is really where you kind of get just a freaky setup that happens. 5 days later, on the morning of March 25th, meteorologists at the base noticed that the weather charts, because remember, there's no satellite, there's really not a lot of weather forecasting tools out there. There's no computer models to know. Sometimes nowadays we know maybe a day or two ahead of time, hey, there's potential that something could be happening. So on March 25th, they noticed that the weather's kind of similar to what it was 5 days earlier. And so they issue a forecast for heavy thunderstorms that evening, because they don't want to call it a tornado warning, because they don't want to potentially
get people like really concerned or freaked out.
Exactly. But at least you could say, hey, it's kind of like this was 5 days ago and this happened.
Let's hunker down.
We're just warning you. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, around 6 o'clock that night, another tornado comes through and touches down on the base. So you have this same spot get hit with a tornado 5 days later.
What is the likelihood of that?
Yeah. And like that, because that's always my thing with tornadoes in general, is they can vary. Sometimes they're on the ground for a mile. Sometimes they can be on the ground for 30, 40 miles. You just never know. You don't know how big they're going to be, or how small, or how strong, or any of that. But that's why, like, tornadoes in downtown sections are very rare, because you're talking a small geographical footprint for this one thing to hit. Now, it does happen occasionally. Like, very famously, Atlanta about 10 years ago had a tornado run right through downtown. So they correctly predicted a tornado.
That's really, like you said, because they didn't have any of the scientific models like we have today, or the machines, right?
Right.
It's kind of incredible that they were able to figure out the pattern and be like, give them a heads up.
Yeah. And so what they had did was, the meteorologists at the base, Major Ernest Fallbush and Captain Robert Miller, went back and looked at the weather charts from the 20th, and that was when they saw the 25th. They're like, hey, there's the potential for this. So they kept doing studies and research afterwards and began to perfect their tornado forecasts. And at first they kept them kind of secret the following spring and summer, because that's really like peak tornado season for that area, April, May period of time. And they issued 18 forecasts for tornadoes within about 100 square mile area of Oklahoma City, and all 18 proved to be correct.
Oh, wow. So they really had the math down.
They had figured out, hey, so we've come a long way since then.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I mean, the more time and preparation someone can have, the better, right?
Right, because that's the key. Literally seconds can matter, because depending where you're at and where the tornado develops, you may not have but just a minute or two to seek cover. Now, again, if it's a little further away and it's kind of coming, you could have 15, 20 minutes. Yeah. But more so, sometimes a day, 2, 3 days in advance, hey, this is kind of not looking good. It kind of touches back to the...
Then you can adjust your plans, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, I don't want to be outside Sunday night because this may not be a good time. It's like, goes back to the storm of the century that we referenced a couple weeks ago. You could kind of know a couple of days out that, hey, we're not sure what's going to happen, but this is not going to be good.
Yeah. Get your drinking water. Get your candles and flashlights and batteries. Yeah, because we can have tornadoes here in Alberta. There was a really bad one. I think it's like 30 some, like 1-2 years ago. So of course everyone is wondering when the next one's going to hit. And I've only been in a few lockdowns as a teacher here in Alberta, and the first and most serious lockdown that I was in was because it was a tornado. We went into lockdown mode and put all the kids into the gym where it was like all concrete and safe and away from windows. But a tornado never actually developed. Yeah. It was a really bad storm, and then the kids got to go home at like 6 o'clock at night. So
because you can't release them at the normal time because it's not safe to All right, go kid. Good luck.
It's like, see you later, kiddos. Good luck out this mega storm without your parents.
Maybe the tornado will pick you up and drop you off quicker than the bus.
Well, in Edmonton, yeah, that's for sure.
Don't go outside in a tornado, kids, if you're listening. Okay?
No, bad idea.
Don't.
No.
Don't do what we joke about doing. We're only
No.
joking. Doesn't end well normally if you get sucked up in a tornado.
No.
Go watch
Definitely
Twister.
does not. No Twister. It's not a happy ending like Wizard of Oz. What else is not a happy ending is this.
You're terrible.
I'm terrible. Is this awful story of I've heard this term like Typhoid Mary, right? When someone's around you and they're really sick and you're like, oh, get away, Typhoid Mary, right? I did not actually know the history of this individual, and it's really awful. She was like literally a walking petri dish, and she was treated horribly. I'm very glad, at least it's awful to go through a pandemic. I'm at least glad for the most part that individuals are not being treated like this poor individual was. So March 27th, 1915, the nickname Typhoid Mary, she is the first healthy carrier of disease ever identified in the United States, and she's put back into quarantine for the second time, where she actually remained for the rest of her life. Awful. So typhoid in of itself is awful. It's a bacterial infection that can lead to high fever, diarrhea, and vomiting. It can be fatal. It's caused by the bacteria Salmonella typhi, and the infection is often passed on through contaminated food or drinking water. And it's very prevalent in areas where there's not proper hygiene. So you're not washing your hands properly, or there's not proper sanitation. And Mary Malone, who was born September 23rd, 1869, she ends up passing away November 11th, 1938. So keep that in mind, right? 1915, she goes into her second quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't pass away until 1938.
So 23 years later.
Yeah. So 23 years, she's basically imprisoned.
We've been in quarantine for a year, and it's not even been a real quarantine in a lot of places.
No.
And she's in quarantine for 23 years.
And she was forcibly confined by police and doctors. And no one else in the history of America who was also identified as a typhoid carrier ever had that happen to them. She's the only one.
Poor Mary.
There was another gentleman. Yeah, there was another gentleman whose nickname was Typhoid John. We never used that word or that term. And same thing, he was a carrier, but he only infected 300 people, and they just kind of let him go. She's going to be an Irish-born individual, and she comes over to America to be a cook in very prominent households in the United States.
Okay, well, hold on now, because she was a cook, and we know it's highly transmissible by food. So I can kind of see where they go, we can't let you in the kitchen.
Right. So she
I'm
comes
okay
over
with that.
Right? She comes over, she lives with her aunt and uncle. She starts working for these prominent households in the United States, most notably in New York State.
Okay.
And she's a cook. She goes through, I think there's like 8 different families. She, by working as a cook, exposes people get sick. She loses her job because people kind of they're sick, they're ill, they let go of some of their servants. And she moves on to another household where yet another outbreak. And so as she goes, there's this repeated pattern of people getting sick because, of course, she doesn't know she's sick. She's asymptomatic.
Mm-hmm.
They believe she was born with it because her mother had it and passed it on to her in the womb.
Okay.
And so she hops along infecting these 8 different families, and 2 to 3 people at a time end up passing away from each of these families. And finally, the first time this doctor gets involved because there's a gentleman she's with a family who is renting a house for the summer. And they realize, renting houses and having typhoid around is really bad. So this landlord hires a detective to figure it out. And he's investigating the pipes and the water. And he finally starts to get a description of this cook. And it leads him back to this Mary Malone, Typhoid Mary. And she goes into quarantine for the first time. She's really upset. She's very mad. She doesn't think she has it. They do all of these tests on her, and they're like, dude, you definitely have it. Like, it's in your gallbladder. You are spreading it. You just got to wash your hands, right? And she admits she doesn't really wash her hands. germ theory at this time in history is not really recognized.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And finally, after her first quarantine, they're like, okay, we can't really keep you. She hires a friend, or she convinces a friend to do these tests for her, which involves inspecting your fecal matter and your urine.
Okay.
And so she has someone,
like she's using her friends.
Yeah, early doping or whatever,
Okay.
Trying to avoid drug testing. Yeah, she uses her friend to conceal and provide healthy, positive fecal material. And they're like, we can't really keep you, but you got to promise us you can't be a cook anymore.
Okay,
right?
So they gave her a chance.
They give her a chance.
They're like, we're going to let you out, but you can't go back and be a cook.
Yes.
Which, because you have this disease that's highly transmissible by food. And we're going to have you prepare. I'm on board so far. You've been told, okay,
right?
You can't do this. You have to do something else. All right.
This is after she's been in quarantine for almost 3 years. So I think after being in quarantine for 3 years, I'd be a little desperate too.
I would too, but I'd be like, okay, that's the rules. That's fair. You think that. Okay.
Yeah. So February 19th, 1910, she says, I'm prepared to change my job. I will no longer be a cook.
Okay.
I promise I won't be involved with food management. And they're like, okay, you're free to go. So she leaves. She becomes a laundress, which you're not dealing with food. You're still dealing with water, which I don't quite get. But it's you're paid a lot less than a cook.
Sure.
Right? $20 a month instead of $50 a month. So she becomes really desperate. And after several unsuccessful years, she dips back into the kitchens and starts cooking again.
She didn't follow the agreement.
She didn't follow the agreement. And she starts working in restaurants and hotels and spa centers.
Oh,
so
no.
She's not working for these families anymore.
This is literally like a COVID nightmare is what this is.
It's a COVID nightmare, right?
Because
she's a walking petri dish of this typhoid.
Yes, because now she's working in hotels and traveling. So people are coming to the hotel. You're getting 0 stars on TripAdvisor because you might die at this hotel. And if you live, you're going to go take typhoid back home. I went to Kansas City and all I got was a t-shirt and typhoid.
Yeah. You're like, no, thanks. And everywhere, surprise, surprise, everywhere she goes, there's an outbreak. Right? But because she changed jobs so frequently,
they couldn't keep up with her.
This doctor tries to track her back down again, this Dr. Sofer. So he finally does find her. He narrows her down and gets a hold of her. But she flees. Because, of course, like, who the heck wants to go back into quarantine for, 3 years?
This is like Dr. Loomis tracking down Michael Myers in Halloween.
I swear, it's like, why is there not a movie about this woman?
There should be.
It's fascinating, all these different families, and these families themselves are very interesting too, right? These prominent New York families. So she flees, they track her down to Long Island. She's returned to quarantine on this North Brother Island, March 27th, 1915. She's going to spend the rest of her life at Riverside Hospital on North Brother Island. 6 years before her death, she sadly has a stroke that she never really completely recovers from, and half of her body is left paralyzed because of it. And then on November 11th, 1938, she dies of pneumonia at the age of 69. Her body's cremated. Her ashes are buried at St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx. And there's 9 people that attend her funeral, which is just I find very sad.
That is sad.
Right? This poor woman comes over from Ireland seeking a new life, and through no fault of her own, right? She's just born with it, spreads this disease to a bunch of other people, and then lives for 38 years the second time in quarantine. It's just I feel wasted
bad.
Life.
Yeah, I mean, I feel bad for her. I wonder if, hindsight being what it is, if she had just so the laundry business didn't work out for her. I get that. But if she went into some other sort of career field other than going back to what they specifically said you can't do.
Yeah. And they did offer her surgery at the time. Doctors felt that by removing the gallbladder, you could remove the typhoid from your body and no longer be contagious. But the problem is a lot of people at this time frame would, in like the 1910s, 1915, would pass away from the gallbladder surgery, that it was not a very successful surgery.
Yeah, surgery.
So she's like, I don't want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that, because surgery back then is a lot riskier. I mean, surgery, even minor surgeries today there is risk. You just don't.
Oh, yeah.
Even
you don't really think about it as
procedures,
much.
right?
Yeah.
You might think of open heart surgery as being more serious than, repairing a broken leg. Well, you're still going under anesthesia, and
yeah, when I had my
there are
thyroid taken out,
risks.
I updated my will and made sure everything was set up just in case, right?
Yeah,
thyroid doesn't seem really scary, but
yeah, because there's always an inherent risk with surgery, especially back then.
So I don't know if I'll be using that term Typhoid Mary anymore, because it's always been used as a very like humorous or facetious manner, right? And I'm like, oh, now that you know the person and you know what it's about, I don't know if I want to use it.
Yeah, I don't know either. Side note, this week in history, on March 30th, 1842, ether anesthesia was used for the first time by Dr. Crawford Long.
What did they use before? Just alcohol?
I guess. Well, ether is sort of...
I mean, it's a form of alcohol, right?
Right, yeah. So I'm not really sure what they were using before then, but so he would just basically dab someone a towel and you would inhale it and out you'd go, and he'd do the surgery. So he removed a tumor from a guy's neck on March 30th, 1842.
That'd be a little scary.
Yeah, a little bit.
Just I'm thinking of like all your arteries in your neck. You're like, ugh.
Yeah, a little risky. Also, Long was a cousin of a Western legend, Doc Holliday.
Oh, that's really cool. It's a neat connection.
Yeah. Kind of cool.
I love that movie Tombstone. That's going to take us off into a tangent.
Yeah, which we will avoid, because I'll just transition to our next topic, which involves transitioning.
How clever of you.
Sometimes I think these out, and sometimes they just come to me. On March 29th, 1984, under the darkness of night, the Baltimore Colts pack up and move to Indianapolis.
It just in one night?
Literally in one night.
Wow.
So the Baltimore Colts had been a football team for a long time, and they had been wanting to get a new stadium for years. The stadium they'd been playing in was outdated, and it was long overdue to be replaced. So on March 2nd, 1984, the NFL owners voted to give the Colts permission to move to another city of their choice. They had been kind of flirting with other cities, such as Phoenix, Indianapolis, Jacksonville, Memphis, Birmingham. So they had been exploring possibilities of moving. And in January of 1984, Baltimore mayor had said, we're not going to build a new stadium. We're just not going to do it. So that was kind of like the final straw to any hope of getting a stadium built.
And they're like, peace out, we're out of here.
Sort of. But they hadn't committed to leaving yet. But the Maryland General Assembly got involved in the dispute and everything. And on March 27th, the Maryland Senate passed legislation giving the city of Baltimore the right to seize ownership of the Colts by eminent domain.
Ooh.
So they could basically say, no, you can't leave. You are our football team. Now,
you belong to us.
Right. And I don't know in Canada, is eminent domain a thing?
I would have to look that up. I don't know.
Okay. So it's a law here. It's basically where the government can come in and say, we're taking this land. We're going to give you value for it, but it's ours. You can leave now. And it's typically done for public uses, like to build roads or expand
like anything
schools.
For public works.
Yeah, anything that benefits the general public. Like my high school that I went to, they went through a period in the late 90s where they were looking to get more land to expand. And so there were some residents nearby that didn't want to move. And then the county was basically like, well, the bulldozers are coming through. Do you want this check or not? Kind of a thing.
Right.
But
So
it had,
a quick Google
okay.
does tell me in Canada that public authorities have the right to acquire private property for public purposes so long as the acquisition is approved by the appropriate government body, whether that's federal or provincial.
Okay. So yes,
So it is a
basically,
thing.
in a sense, it's the same thing.
Yes.
But doing it to keep a private
Football
business
team.
and a football team was a little different. Although
Yes.
it had been threatened before with Oakland and the whole history of the Oakland Raiders, which is another side bar that we can get into on some night, or some future episode, some night, whatever. I don't know, day, night, whenever people are listening to this.
Yeah. We don't dictate when you watch or listen.
So what happened is this is approved that they can seize the team. Well, they don't know when they're going to do it, but they don't want this to happen. So,
so they're like, we got to get out of Dodge.
Right. So the Colts owner talks, he had been to Indianapolis. They had just built a brand new Hoosier Dome. Colts say, all right, we're coming to Indianapolis. So after he gets off the phone with the Colts owner, the mayor of Indianapolis called his neighbor and friend, who just so happened to be the CEO of Mayflower Transit, an Indiana-based moving company.
How interesting.
Uh-huh. So they send 15 Mayflower trucks to the Colts facility at around 10 o'clock at night. And they wanted to move quickly because they don't know when they're going to pass this bill to try to seize ownership of the team. We got to get out of here. And so literally within 8 hours, they had emptied out the entire building, loaded it into the moving trucks, and we're on the road.
And we're gone. Can you imagine seeing that convoy of 15 transport trucks?
Not so fast, my friend.
Oh, I'm interested.
They did not roll out in a convoy because they did not want to create a scene or raise alerts. Exactly. So all the trucks took different routes out of Baltimore en route back to Indianapolis.
This is like a spy film. They're like, all right, we'll disperse into the night.
Yeah. That's basically
oh my goodness.
kind of what happened. They didn't want to draw attention from the Maryland State Police or anything. They didn't want to be potentially stuck in a blockade or something. So it's like maybe if they got one truck, but they couldn't get all the trucks. So
sneaky.
As the trucks reached the Indiana state line, Indiana State Police were there to meet them and to escort them to Indianapolis.
Oh my goodness, just in case.
Just in case, so there would be no funny business. Yeah.
That is interesting. Oh my goodness. That's funny. Think about them making this plan.
On very short notice at that.
That is some efficient moving.
Yes, it is.
Because that's also like not only the stadium and all of the equipment. I'm assuming then the players themselves are like, we got to pack our house. Like, going home to the wives and kids and be like, let's go, we're out.
Well, they would have been employees of they would have played for the team. So the government couldn't have stopped them from leaving necessarily. But
if they wanted to resume normal games, I'm assuming, right?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. But ultimately, you do need to find a way to get to Indianapolis because football season starts in 5 months. But one thing it did prompt the city of Baltimore to do is the Orioles, the baseball team, needed a new stadium. Well, they got that because now that they don't have the Colts, Orioles are the only thing left in Baltimore. All right, well, we're going to make sure y'all get a new stadium.
So they got a new nest.
Mm-hmm. And in an ironic twist, the Cleveland Browns in 1995 wound up moving to Baltimore. So Baltimore got a team again. So the current Baltimore Ravens are, in essence, the Cleveland Browns.
The former Cleveland Browns.
Not to be confused with the current Cleveland Browns football team that restarted in 2002.
Oh, as a non-sports person, I'm like looking and thinking of mental math of like who is from where. That is some crazy good logistics.
Mm-hmm.
I have another transportation story. But it's not transport trucks or highways. It involves the ocean. So, Mike.
Yep.
Do you know what a Bluenoser is?
A Bluenoser.
I mean, we all know what a brown noser is, but what's a Bluenoser?
Well, a Bluenoser would be the thing on the end of Tony the Tiger's face.
No.
They have Frosted Flakes in Canada, right?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, so it's a Bluenose. Okay, all right, just making sure.
A Bluenoser is my people. So a Bluenoser is actually a term for individuals who are from Nova Scotia. It's also the name of a very famous ship in Canada. The schooner, the Bluenose, is going to be christened in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia on March 21st. Now, a lot of people think the term Bluenoser for the people came from the boat, but it's actually the opposite. The boat got its name because of the nickname for the people. It is so famous in Canada, it's on our 10-cent coin.
Oh, so it is very significant then.
It's very significant, yeah. And it is going to not only be a fishing vessel, but it's also in the off season for fishing. It's a racing vessel, and it's not going to lose one race in 17 years. It's so important we actually made a second Bluenose 2 after it retired. Well, I'm going to get into the history of it, but it basically retired. And we have the Bluenose 2, and it's docked in Lunenburg, and it's actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So very, very famous boat. You can go on tours and day trips on it. It's a beautiful ship. It's going to become a provincial icon for Nova Scotia and a Canadian symbol starting in the 1930s. It's going to work as a fishing vessel until it's wrecked in 1946, and it got the nickname the Queen of the North Atlantic. So what's very interesting is she's launched on the 26th of March, 1921, and christened by Audrey Smith, who's going to be the daughter of the shipbuilder Richard Smith. It's designed by William J. Roux for fish for cod off the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, and also designed to be very, very quick. Because, of course, the sooner you got into harbor with your load, the better price you could get for your fish. So these ships were designed to be perfect fishing vessels, but also really fast. So she's going to be skippered by the Captain Angus J. Walters against the fastest American schooners. Many of them are going to be from Massachusetts. The Bluenose crew set its sights on winning the International Fisherman's Race, which you might not have known as a race, but it was a very big deal in the 1930s. And it pitted working fishermen in the regular schooners for what's known as the Fisherman's Trophy. And the Bluenose will achieve that goal and more. Like I said, it didn't lose a race in 17 years. It's going to win that trophy, though, in 1921, 22, and 23. It's going to be defeated by the Boston schooner Gertrude L. the Bold in the Lipton Cup in 1930. But then it will outrace that ship for the Fisherman's Trophy in 31 and 38. So it has the record for being the fastest ship, and also the record for the largest catch of fish ever brought into Lunenburg Harbor.
Now I want fish for dinner.
Last week it was chicken, this week it was fish. Despite its international fame, the Bluenose, though, comes to a very sad ending. As the salt fishery declines and sailing schooners are replaced with engine-powered ships on the Grand Banks, the Bluenose is sold in 1942 to the West Indies Trading Company. And Captain Walters, who's going to be the last Nova Scotian owner of the ship, is rumored as, the rumor is that he stood on the edge of the harbor as the ship sailed away, and he wept watching the ship leave. In the Caribbean, the Bluenose is going to be carrying rum, sugar, bananas, and war supplies for the United States. The ship had a close call while running aviation fuel. And this is really interesting. It was carrying aviation fuel and dynamite near Havana, Cuba, when a German U-boat surfaces right beside it.
Oh, this is not, no.
Right? You're like,
first of all, carrying fuel and dynamite itself is
this sounds like a terrible idea.
No.
Right? We talked 2 weeks ago about the dangers of just carrying gypsum in your ship. Right? And this is a wooden ship, right? It's it's not like a metal ship. It's a wooden sailing ship. So aviation.
This just has disaster literally written all over it.
Now, luckily, the submarine captain comes and talks to the captain of the Bluenose, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm fishing." And according to the account, the German recognizes the Bluenose as a sailing ship and a fishing ship, because it was so famous, and he just let it keep going. He didn't even realize it was carrying all of these resources for the Americans.
Wow.
So he just sails off. But in 46, while hauling freight, near Haiti, it's going to hit a reef and sink.
Oof.
So,
well, at
not
least it didn't.
fun.
At least it didn't hit the reef and blow up.
It didn't blow up. That's great. 20 years after the original Bluenose sank, people in the home port of Lunenburg decide to build a replica of the great schooner that's so important in their history. And the Olin Brewery paid for the project, and it actually used the ship, the Bluenose 2, to advertise its beer. So the Olin Brewery is like a really famous brewery in Nova Scotia. Like my dad would, have Olin's beer all the time at home. And the brewery is quite nice on Halifax Harbor. So the Bluenose 2 is going to be built in the same shipyard. It's going to be launched in 1963. In 71, it's given as a gift to the province of Nova Scotia, and it begins its life as a sailing ambassador on behalf of the province. You can go to Lunenburg and see it. In 2009, the Nova Scotia government decided that it's time to restore this aging wooden ship. It's already 50 years old at this time. After lengthy delays, the rebuilt Bluenose 2 is launched into Lunenburg Harbor in the spring of 2015. And the work was several years later than anticipated and several $1 million over budget. But the sailing ambassador is back in business, at least until COVID hit.
Hopefully they recover.
And I mean, Nova Scotia is known as, we have provinces in Canada and we have not provinces in Canada. And Nova Scotia is known as a have not province. It's on the poorer end of the economic scale. And we have an equalization payment program in Canada. So wealthier provinces will transfer money to less wealthy province to try and keep economic balance in the country. So going that much over money is like really bad. And we do rely heavily on tourism. So COVID stopping tourism from coming into what is cutely called the Atlantic bubble right now. It's not great for business and tourism, but
yeah, well, it's like here. I mean, obviously, Florida is a very tourism-dependent state. I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll do some research and I'll have some numbers next week for you.
For how much losses you guys had over last year?
Yeah, because
let's look into it for both of our areas.
Because I know, obviously, travel was down a year ago at this point, and tourism tax dollars is a big thing here because there's hotel taxes and stuff, and revenue was way
well, because if you think of all the thousands upon thousands of people that go for Disney and Universal and all that, but then you're also spreading your wealth out in terms of eating out in the hotels and Ubers and taxis and
it's the rising tide lifts all boats kind of a thing. When Disney made the decision, and I'd have to go back again, and I'll have this next week because I don't remember off the top of my head because so much of it was a blur. But basically, when Disney closed down, the other parks kind of had to as well because Disney's the one that drives the boat here. No reference really intended to your previous story, but if Disney's going to close, that's not going to draw as many people in. So then they kind of force the other parks to have to close. And the same kind of thing once they reopen. It's like, okay, well, Disney's going to reopen. Well, we can reopen, and kind of started getting things going a bit.
Well, and I don't know how you felt as a young person growing up in Florida, but growing up in Nova Scotia, I actually hated when the tourists would come because now your town is suddenly full of strangers and there's traffic and there's people that don't understand the culture or the way of life. And you're just I just want these people out of my town, right? Now, as an adult, you realize the significance of tourist dollars and how those individuals coming, and I was always polite, you were never rude to anybody, but you realize the importance of those tourist dollars. And now, I feel so bad for my home province after they have gone through COVID and seeing the decline.
You can still be annoyed by tourists, but you realize that they're important. Here it's a little different because of the weather. I mean, yes, we do have peak tourist season during the summer because kids, and Disney attracts kids and families.
Well, I'm assuming people being off school and things like that.
Right. So spring break, summertime, Christmas break, those are peak times, obviously, for these places. But really year round, you're getting a flow of tourists coming in. You're not, yes, like I said, there are peak times. There are times when the numbers are down a little bit more but there's always people coming here. And with geographically, like with the way Orlando is, there are people that land at Orlando International Airport and think they're at Disney in 5 minutes.
And you're like, that's not really the case.
That's not really how this works. Disney's like 25 minutes away from the airport, so it's people can be spread out. So there's really like tourist part of town. Then there's like downtown part of town where you work and whatnot. And then there's, suburbs and so on.
No,
so
in Nova Scotia, you could set your watch almost by like, oh, okay, it's like after May long, tourist time.
Now, like if you say you worked at the airport, then
yes,
you would definitely notice it. Like, oh, the line backs up past the Cinnabon. It must be spring break.
Yeah, it's funny how your perspective can change as you get older.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of different parts of the country and different tastes and preferences and all that fun stuff, that takes us to March 31st, 1985, when the first WrestleMania was held at Madison Square Garden.
Oh, this story has your name all over it.
It does. And before you turn the show off, stay with me. It's interesting. I promise. Okay. So basically, the way the wrestling was throughout most of the 1900s was you had different territories. Okay. So like you had the WWWF, as it was known at the time, that would run like New York and like the Northeast kind of area. You had promotions in Florida, you had Georgia, you had the Carolinas, you had St. Louis, you had Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, up in Montreal was a different territory. So you had all these different groups around the country. So what happened was in so Ted Turner, the guy who started CNN in the 80s, he had a television station in Atlanta, WTCG. And in December of 1976, they began broadcasting this feed. It was an independent TV station in Atlanta, and they began broadcasting it to cable and satellite systems across the country. And it became known as really the Superstation. So it's still a local channel because cable is still very much in its infancy. And you have your cable networks that are starting to become a thing, and they're national channels. Well, this was still primarily like a local Atlanta-based channel just being broadcast nationally.
Okay.
Very famously here in the States, WGN is another example of this. Okay. That's a station out of Chicago. They would carry Chicago Cubs games, for example. So normally, like if you lived in, let's say Baltimore, for example, going back to our previous story about Baltimore, if you wanted to watch Baltimore Oriole games, you had to live in Baltimore. Well, now that you have this TV station from Atlanta broadcasting nationwide, if you have cable, you can see Atlanta Braves games.
Okay, without having to live there.
Without having lived there. And that's how I became a Braves fan. Okay. Because they were on TBS. This is why a lot of Chicago Cub fans exist, because WGN was broadcast nationally throughout the country. Here's how we're tying this back into WrestleMania. So one of the most popular programs on the channel was Georgia Championship Wrestling.
Okay.
So in the early 80s, Vince McMahon winds up taking over the WWF from his dad.
Yep, which we've talked about with our Hulk Hogan.
Correct.
Right?
Okay. So what he wants to do is he wants to wind up taking WWF and making it a nationwide thing. So he winds up making a deal in 1984 to buy the Georgia Championship Wrestling time slot on TBS.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Okay. So he makes a deal with, at the time, there were basically four people who ran Georgia Championship Wrestling. You had Ole Anderson, you had Jack and Jerry Briscoe, and you had Jim Barnett. And so the Briscoe brothers and Barnett agreed to sell their shares of Georgia Championship Wrestling to Vince McMahon. So in essence, he's bought now the time on TBS to air WWF wrestling, which was more of a cartoonish, over-the-top kind of style, whereas Georgia Championship Wrestling was more of a realistic,
like the actual sporting event.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't quite have all the theatrics and stuff.
Okay,
So
because I grew up with WWF. It was like
it's a
soap
little over the
operas for men.
top. Yes. Whereas, the Southern style of wrestling is sometimes called wrestling. So it's like it's two regular guys getting in there, and it's not just put a chin lock on a guy for 20 minutes, but it has a little more of a realistic feel to it.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Okay.
Yep.
So July 14th, 1984, the Briscoe brothers and Jim Barnett sell their stock to Vince McMahon. So this becomes known as Black Saturday in the wrestling business. Because
now, is this terms of like, yay, we're making money, like we're in the black?
No, because...
Or like, oh, sadness.
Sadness.
Oh.
Okay. Because all these people turn on their TV and they don't see all the wrestlers that they're used to seeing. They see Vince McMahon here, and I'm going to start showing you my wrestlers and
oh no, everything. So everyone was just so sad.
Yes. Oh. And ratings went down the crapper very quickly.
Oh no.
So much so, in fact, that the core audience isn't watching wrestling anymore. This was one of the highest rated programs on the network, and now nobody's watching it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is bad business. It's bad for everybody. It's bad for the network. So Ted Turner winds up going to 2 other regional territories, and he goes to Bill Watts, who ran Mid-South Championship Wrestling out of like Louisiana area. He gives him a time slot on Sunday afternoon, and he goes to Ole Anderson, who the 4th guy from Georgia Championship Wrestling. He started a Championship Wrestling from Georgia territory to kind of compete. So he gives him time on Saturday morning. Well, both of these are doing better ratings than Vince's time slot.
Oh no.
Saturday nights. So Vince is like, well, wait a minute. I wanted to be the only wrestling on this channel. I'm not happy about this. And also nobody's watching it, so it's not going well. So he's losing money on the deal. He goes to Jim Barnett, one of the guys involved. He's like, is there anybody you think we could sell the slot back to so I can get my money back for it? And he suggests sell it to Jim Crockett, who runs the North Carolina Mid-Atlantic territory, because they were really kind of one of the bigger groups at the time. And he's like, okay. So they wind up selling the time to Jim Crockett for about $1 million. He sells the rights back. So, okay. So this money helps in part to finance the first WrestleMania.
Oh.
Because the WrestleMania was a big gamble. See, because at the time, wrestling, as we mentioned, was very territorial.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that Jim Crockett did on Thanksgiving night, 1983, he has an event called Starrcade. And it's shown on closed circuit TV. Because pay-per-view is not really quite a thing yet.
Right.
Closed circuit TV, you'd go to a theater or to a performing arts center or something. It'd be like a licensed place. Correct. Yeah. Exactly. You'd gather with a crowd and watch an event. So he did this in 1983, 1984. He had done a couple of Starrcades. So he kind of was like the other guy, the Pepsi to Coke kind of a thing. Okay. So this winds up being a good deal. So Vince winds up promoting his WrestleMania event on TBS, and on March 30th, 1985 was the final WWF show on TBS. March 31st is WrestleMania. So he has used up all this time to promote his big event, which was available on closed circuit, but it was also on pay-per-view, which was beginning to become a thing. And there's a whole nother sub-story to this with these two going head-to-head that we'll get into at a later time. The ironic twist in all this, so Vince has used his final broadcast on WTBS to promote WrestleMania was the night before WrestleMania. We're going to jump ahead 13 years into the story to March 26th, 2001. Vince McMahon winds up buying WCW, which was what the Jim Crockett promotion eventually turned into. Again, I'm skipping way ahead.
Oh, so he kind of was the catalyst for it starting, and then ends up buying it all back 13 years later.
Sort of. So he winds up buying that company, and the final WCW Monday Nitro airs on March 26, 2001.
Oh, neat.
And they wind up doing this simulcast between WCW and WWF at the time. And so the final segment on WCW's last program was used to promote that Sunday's WrestleMania.
Oh, funny.
So it's just kind of
all came back full circle.
Weird full circle sort of thing. And there's a ton more in there, but we're out of time, and we'll get to it at some point. But
fascinating. Yeah, it's interesting, like when you've talked about wrestling, and there's just the business model of wrestling alone, and how fascinating that is.
Oh, for sure. And so, the wrestling business model is different and has evolved, much as we've discussed how the music business used you toured to promote albums. Now you make albums, so you have new content to play on a tour. Wrestling used to be you'd use your TV program to promote your live events to get people to come out. Well, now there's so much money in the TV business that WWE has not had a crowd in over a year for wrestling. They've been doing it
all online,
without
on TV, on screen,
but they've still been profitable because they don't have the overhead of running events on the road and production costs and that sort of thing.
And that's like what we're going to see too with film, right? As producers start to realize, like, having a mixed model of like in theater and at home release.
Yes, agreed.
So times they are a changing.
Yes, but one thing that is not changing is that we are out of time.
We are out of time for this week.
And so if you didn't make it to the end of this episode, I hope your favorite TV show doesn't get canceled. Oh, wait. Doesn't? Yeah. I hope your favorite TV show does get canceled.
Does. Yes.
Yeah. Unless, of course, it's one of my favorites, in which case, then I hope it doesn't. But
your second favorite. But it also ends on a cliffhanger right before it gets canceled, because that's the worst.
Or it's one season and they set up a cliffhanger for season 2 and season 2 never happens.
Yeah, that's the worst.
Yeah.
But you've listened to the end, so that is not your future.
So we hope your show gets renewed.
Indefinitely. Actually, no, there's sometimes you do got to end a show, but
every show has to end at some point.
When it's the right time. And it's the right time for us. So if you have any questions, concerns, queries, freakouts, you can reach us at thetimemachine@gmail.com, or the Time Machine with Mike, and I don't know why I always want to drop our names. The Time Machine with Trish and Mike @gmail.com. You can find us with that same name on Instagram and YouTube if you search us.
Yes. Do all that, please. And thank you. And
merci beaucoup.
Yeah, what she said. We'll see you next week right here on The Time Machine.